up next for choice board development and strategies, we have Ryan New and Suzanne Kramer. Welcome. So glad you guys are here with us today.
Happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday. So they're going to talk about choice board development and strategies. And this is another way for us to work on our questioning and deeper thinking, right, Suzanne?
Yes.
So as you are joining our chat, make sure that you introduce yourself and as well as where you are from, because we want to know how we can help you. And if you have a teammate or a coworker that could join us, give them a shout out, send them an email with the link of jcpsdigitallearning.com so that they too can join, because joining live is very important. It adds that live question and answer. And we have a whole team that is watching this chat and helping answer those questions live. So it's so beneficial for you to be here live. But if you're concerned that, oh no, I don't remember what they said, or I want to go back, it's all recorded. You have that power of pause, and you can rewind and rewatch, even if you are in the live watch, as well as later on, once we end this session for our lunch at 12 o'clock, you can rewatch it and it'll be there until it's ready to be cut up, and then those pieces will be there too. So Ryan, let's dig into this awesome work. I'm excited to learn from you.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us. So Suzanne and I are going to look at how can I use questions to build interdisciplinary choice boards. So I know that there's a lot of choice boards that are out there, and I know the teachers are already starting to work on these. These are sort of like a 2.0 version that might be very helpful for academies or for interdisciplinary PLCs, or even for teachers to be thinking about this. So what we have at the very front end of this is just a series of tools that you guys have probably already seen and been using quite a bit, but we just linked them into our presentation just in case you guys needed to get those. So these are, of course, the toolkits. These are what the choice boards that looked at. It looks like our team will be creating 2 more sets of these. So it'll be a total of 5 choice boards that are out there that look just like this, that are not in the interdisciplinary nature, but more in the sort of fan nature of these are things that students can be engaged in. These are the templates in case you want to use these. I know that Lacey Eccles is just showing a science teacher who used one of these to build out some choice boards for theirs. They went to this blank template here and reconfigured for their purposes. And of course, here are the resources that we've been curating for you guys that are all vetted. They're basically put in 2 different camps. One as a resource, meaning that it could be anything from something that could be fun to use to help enhance what you're doing, or the second way is by lessons that have been vetted and approved by to make sure they align to standards and so on. So what we're looking at today is the 2.0 version of the choice boards, taking this to sort of the next step. Now, interdisciplinary can mean a couple different things. One of them is the idea of integrating the standards together, right? That you might have an ELA standard, social studies standards, and those are working in tandem to do a task. That might be a 3.0 version. This is really a 2.0 version using a different type of conduit, a different type, as Suzanne would say, or a different type of glue, right? A different type of melding these together, which are questions. At the very center of this, we have compelling questions, which has really come out of the social studies world, this compelling and supporting questions, but it doesn't have to stay in social studies. And so the compelling question is really the ultimate aim for students, which is why it's in the center. The supporting questions, which come from the disciplines themselves and the standards on which they are based, help supply the supports to get students ready to answer a compelling question. So these terms have very specific meanings, and we want to try to be as faithful to those meanings as possible. A compelling question is intellectually rigorous and student-friendly. And so it's also motivating for students to be able to answer. Oftentimes, essential or focused questions do not make space or room for students' lived experiences to come into that question and ultimately into that answer, which means that students are oftentimes forced to sort of deal with a question that doesn't involve their lives. Compelling questions are meant to involve students' lives. It's supposed to be for them to consider what the disciplines and the standards say, and then weigh them against their own experiences, right? Or filter them through their own perspectives. So a question like, how does where you live affect how you live, is a compelling question. It is intellectually rigorous, it's student-friendly, meaning that it's students can hold that in their heads, right? But it's also motivating in the sense that it automatically gets under your skin. If you hear a question like, how do we keep our communities healthy, or what makes our communities healthy, you can't help but start to answer that based upon your own perspectives. And ultimately, they are argumentative. Argumentative in the sense that they are subjective, that there is not a correct answer to this. But it doesn't mean that argumentative in the sense that we're trying to force an argument. Argumentation for us is literally answering a compelling question using evidence, right? And so it's more about the learner. It's more about the individual trying to formulate what they are thinking. Not an argument in the sense that you might have with, your mom or dad or brothers and sisters growing up. We're not trying to force that type of emotional response of students. We're trying to say, no, this is how I think about a thing, and I must bear the burden of proof to be able to say that which I believe. And only a student can do this. It's why we think that argumentation is so great, because it's really the first time that we were really allowing individuals to be formed in our classrooms, right? And that these are going to be used to frame the choice boards. Supporting questions are where the disciplines come to bear, and that the content comes to bear, because these are grounded in the standards and really grounded in the knowns. If compelling questions are more subjective in nature, supporting questions are much more objective in nature. It is the things that that there's agreement in the field. So, for example, in history, we might know, for example, the effect or why they brought about Medicare and Medicaid. But we don't necessarily know if that made our society better. So a supporting question might be, why did the United States adopt Medicare, as an example, as it's trying to get to a larger compelling question, which was, did the Great Society make the United States great? Right. So you're looking at weighing what happens once that's been created. There's no, you can't take that as off the rails. I mean, we have senators and representatives and the president and what the media is saying at the time of why Medicare is being created. And these supporting questions then help frame our individual lessons. So these two work in tandem. They can be scaffolded. They can be used in an interdisciplinary way, in a way that essential or focused questions cannot be. And so what you have here is pick your metaphor, right? What is if a compelling question is the top of the stool is only a stool if it has legs as well, right? But you can't have just legs with no top of the stool, right? So they got to work together. In the same way that if a compelling question is the roof, what good is a roof without the supporting questions, walls in this case, right? So these are working together to build a larger structure. So for us, then, this is what pulling these together is what this might look like. Here you have in the very center of this, how can disease change the world? Students are able to their feelings about this, what they're thinking about in the summative performance, which we've put in here as a collaboration with the Fraser History Museum, which is hoping that students will submit their responses about COVID-19 and the disruption in their lives and how it's affected them, through the lens of all the different disciplines that we bring to their daily educational experiences. So you have a compelling question in the center. You have a summative performance task. That summative performance task is the ultimate goal of this entire choice board, that everything will be funneling into this question and this summative task. Around them, you see a series of supporting questions. Really, there's only two different types that we have here. We have some hashtags and some without. The ones with hashtags are the ones that you might employ, where teachers are saying, we really have to have these questions being answered. Or we really need a grade for these kind of questions, whatever the case might be. Suzanne and I thought that it would be great to tag these specifically to signal to students that these need to be completed. The tasks for each of the supporting questions help build up to the summative performance task, right? So the tasks are aligned, the questions are aligned. Formative performance task for each of the supporting questions aligns to the summative performance task for the compelling question. Each of the supporting questions help build to the compelling question, right? So that there's a scaffolding sort of process involved here, but that it becomes interdisciplinary in the sense that the questions are the umbrella. Specifically, the compelling question is the umbrella for all the disciplines. So if you're developing one of these, you want to make sure that the compelling question is broad enough so that you don't paint yourself into a corner where students can't really, you're sort of jamming in questions to try to get kids to do that. It's very difficult. One of the ones I mentioned earlier is a fantastic one, I think, which is, what makes a community healthy? That has a different, if you look at that from a scientific point of view versus an art point of view versus a music point of view versus an ELA point of view versus social studies, you sort of get what we're seeing here is that each of these different disciplines have a way of sort of shaping a student's response to that answer. So if we were to build one of these, how would you go about making sure that your compelling questions are good? The first thing that you'll want to do is create a compelling question. That's where it really starts. That meets the criteria that I mentioned earlier of what a great compelling question should be, which is that it's argumentative, that it's intellectually rigorous, that it is motivating, and that it's kid-friendly, right? Then you're going to stress test this compelling question with the different content areas. Essentially what I just did. What makes a community healthy? Well, how do I answer this from the different areas? By doing so, that actually helps you sort of reveal the other types of questions that those disciplines might reveal in making those great supporting questions. But before you create the supporting questions, what you'll want to do is come up with your summative performance task. Now, the district has said that maybe one assignment per week is what we're looking for. So what this means is that all the formative performance tasks would help funnel things in, right, to help you create the summative performance task, which means then that you should see traces. You should be able to see the DNA of those formative performance tasks and the supporting questions that students are answering. I used to be a collegiate coach, and there's two ways of making sure that kids run for cross country in the summertime. One is by having them track every single day, which is monotonous and overbearing and patronizing to my runners. The other is to do a 2-mile time trial on the first day back, because I'm able to see then the person who ran 0 and the person who ran a lot, right, and did what the workout plan was supposed to be. That's essentially what the summative performance task is trying to do. It's the 2-mile time trial. You could have any type of summative performance task. The one that I gave earlier, the Fraser History Museum, also backpack artifacts, right, and more traditional types of assessments. Once you're able to get where you want students to go, both in the compelling and in the summative performance task, then you can start to look at, well, what are the supporting questions I need to help students build towards that compelling question and be able to answer that summative performance task. Which is why then, after you have your discipline-specific supporting questions, you then create formative performance tasks that are aligned to those questions. But these formative performance tasks must be aligned both to the supporting question and also help students complete the summative performance task. Step 5 here is the most difficult side of this because you're really trying to create a solid webbing that's going to help students hit that summative performance task. What this might look like over time, Suzanne and I put together this schedule here just as an example of what you might be able to show to students and how you might conceptualize how students are approaching this. So that it's not just sort of willy-nilly, but they could have maybe a suggestion from you of how they might approach it. You'll notice that our hashtags are all present, all 5 of them, including the compelling question you can see runs through the entire week. Also, you'll notice that on Friday, there is not much there. It's because, supposedly, if you're doing it in this way and have designed a summative performance task, then on Friday, they're really working on that compelling question. Here's another example that's a little bit more specific, right, to individual days of what might happen. But at the same time, you know what? Maybe art is something that they're trying to do, and if they have if they're privileged enough to have those supplies, maybe their paint has to dry over time, and maybe it's a 2-day project or something. So this is then going to carry us into Suzanne part here about sort of pulling this all together in a disciplinary way.
So as we were considering how we could use questions as as the conduit for interdisciplinary planning, a way for teachers to come to the table, we really wanted to take a student-centered approach, considering, what are students experiencing in terms of the silos of their different classes. And I think that this is particularly magnified in NTI. So the student is receiving a series of disconnected activities or assignments where there may be no relationship between what teachers are asking them to do. And there may even be redundancy where they're doing similar sorts of things, maybe even in ELA or in social studies. And I think particularly at the secondary, this is most acute at the secondary level, where we may not have teaming, or we may not have interdisciplinary PLCs. And so we aren't aware of what students are experiencing from their other classes. And so this is a way for us to come to the table in NTI and provide a more coherent and student-friendly and student-centered experience. And we hope that this is something that we can carry on into the next academic year. So we've, built a sort of a diagram that pulls together these ideas, and you'll see the compelling question at the top, the supporting questions from each discipline. And then, of course, PLCs, both content and interdisciplinary should consider what those success criteria are, especially as we think about what is met and what is not met in terms of our grading. And then just as part of our regular PLC process, how will we know when students know it? That is that success criteria, and we have feedback all along the way. And then, of course, those choice board tasks are answering ultimately the supporting question and then the compelling question. And in a sense, elementary school teachers may have an advantage in this line of thinking because they don't have there aren't 6 different teachers teaching 6 different disciplines. And so here we've begun the process of taking away those silos, those lines, right? So what if we could have a compelling question, task in the center, then we could make the interdisciplinary. So rather than starting with standards, which is really tricky, sometimes standards don't speak to each other, or practices, which we're all, learning what our practices look like in NTI. We have supporting questions that are for ELA, social studies, the arts, science, math, health, and PE. And then we are also blurring the lines of those lessons. So what are those mini lessons, the modeling, the think aloud, those screencastify lessons that we're posting in our classrooms for students to access asynchronously? What will students need to know and understand to be able to get to those choice board tests? And again, of course, we've thought about what those success criteria are, and we're giving students feedback all along the way in that Monday through Friday schedule that Ryan showed you. And so our hope is that this sort of core thinking that we're showing here in these diagrams can be built out over the course of the next academic year, where we can add standards to the top, we can integrate our practices, we can add those industry and community partnerships along the side, and that this can become sort of the core model for how we can do interdisciplinary planning and design in a way that makes the experience more coherent and engaging for students.
So is there any questions?
Ryan, I don't know if we have anyone from the digital team in here to relay the questions to us.
We sure do. Yes, we have.
You do. You're here. Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you, Elaine. Do we have any questions?
Of course. Well, not any current questions. We do have a whole team that's behind the scenes that is making sure that any questions are being answered to the best of our ability. But we also have Susan Price in here, and so she's answering any questions as well.
Perfect.
But we're welcoming lots of awesome viewers. And if you are joining us just now, make sure that you introduce yourself. And Dr. Reynolds is even in here. So I love it. Lots of people are joining, and I'll make sure you get any questions.
Yeah, actually, do you mind if I share something real quick?
Oh, of course.
This is, I think, this is from Lacey. And evidently there was a person, a teacher, I think it's okay to share here. But this came up in our meeting this morning. And so I'll reshare my screen here in just a second. So this was not necessarily an interdisciplinary choice board, but you can also use compelling and supporting questions within your own discipline. And so this was an example of a chemistry teacher at
Central High School.
Thank you. And as you can sort of see here, this is a copy of their choice boards where they've gone through and actually built out for their students using that example that Suzanne and I created as a model. But again, this is germane specific to chemistry. And so supporting and compelling questions can be across the board, both in an interdisciplinary way, but that's exactly how in social studies we've created our entire system, right? Units are done by compelling questions, and then lessons are done by supporting questions. And as you can see here, these are some examples of what this chemistry teacher has done, right? Where they actually build over time, right, for his students, so that by the very end, they're really getting at climate change, right? So we actually see his process over time that even the disciplines, the boards work as standalones, but they're also then scaffolding to the much larger concept, which is a very cool way of also using these choice boards. So I just wanted to point that out before we got going. That this is actually in real time this week happening by the hard work of our teachers across the district.
And one other thing, this morning in our CDLI team meeting, I had sort of thinking about how we take the existing choice boards and take that concept and then help people move to this execution as this great teacher at Central is beginning to do. And I think the Genius Hour, which we saw at least on some of the elementary school choice boards this last time, could be a really interesting way to have one of those or two of those boxes be a student-centered, student-driven question. So our deeper learning team posted for kids to do some self-guided inquiry, and then their inquiry question could become one of those supporting questions in that second layer of that graphic. And we would coach students around ensuring that supporting question will then guide us to the compelling question and so forth. And so I think that's also another step that teachers could take to bring in student agency for those supporting questions.
All right, well, thank you guys very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Suzanne or I. We're happy to try to answer them. We've gotten a few this week, which we're always happy to do, and also to help plan. So.